Okay, Masechet Pesachim, Daf 51. We're talking about the status of minhagim, customs, and these, even though they're just customs, they're not so easy to change once a family person is accustomed to doing them. We saw the story about the people of Bet She'an who had a custom from there, but before them, from the generation before, not to travel on Friday, even a short travel, and they tried to undo that because for business reasons. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no, Shema Beni Musar Abicha. Good. Well, now see another series of stories of people who have a certain custom, and it's a custom that's mistaken. And the question is whether to teach them that it's a wrong custom and change their ways, or that they should continue doing that custom. So in this case, Bnei Hoza'eh Nahageh Mefarshe Chala Me'aroza. So people in this area, the Sasanian Persians divided the empire into different districts, so called by the kind of family names. So this is Bnei Hoza'eh. The Jews there, their custom was to take challah even from rice dough. And now challah only has to be taken from the 5 grains. As we saw, rice is not one of them. So this is an extra chumrah. Seems to be more than a chumrah. It's like a mistake. You know, they thought any dough was what one had to do it, and so they were taking from rice. Maybe there weren't any great sages that were there to teach them. So this is what they're doing for a long time. So some people said, oh, they look what they're doing, and they told Rav Yosef, you have to teach them the right way. So you should take the challah. A non-kohen should go there and eat the challah that they separated from rice. No, it's not even just enough to tell them that you don't have to do that. Go and do an act to show them that this is not challah. You don't have to do it. Teach them the right way. This is not a minhag. It's a minhag ta'ut. Iti be Abaye. So that's what Rav Yosef said. But then Abaye challenges him. Says, Devarim mutarim, v'acharim nahagu behem isur, so we have a general rule that anything that is permitted, but people have a custom to be stringent, we should not permit it in front of them. In other words, this is who says this is not a minhag ta'ut. This is a minhag. They're taking the stringency, and we don't have a right to undo a stringency that is a custom, like Rabbi Yochanan did in the previous case. Okay, Amar lo velav mi tamad Allah. Amar Rav Chisda bekuta'eh. Rav Yosef answers that rule that you cannot undo a stringency that people have. That's only pertains to kuta'im, to Samaritans. That's what Rav Chisda says. Why? Who are the Samaritans? They're remnants of the 10 tribes. So they're not technically Jews because they're not from Judea, than the northern 10 tribes. Most of the time we consider them not Jewish. They don't consider themselves Jewish either. They follow only the 5 books of Moses, and therefore reject all of Nach and Torah Sheba'al Peh. However, there were certain times of history, and this seems to be one of them, when people like Rabbi Akiva says they converted. In Sefer Melachim says they converted because they were scared of lions. It says nevertheless they're actual converts, and therefore to some degree at certain times and places they were considered actually Jewish, and therefore any halachot that they kept well. And so they were to some degree part of the Jewish community. So in this case, these if Samaritans have a stringency, then we don't tell that's against halacha. We don't tell them that halacha is more lenient. Why? Because if they undo that, then they're going to undo more things. So if they have a stringency, at least they're doing something. So that's regarding Samaritans. We let them remain ignorant of halacha if they're being more stringent. So since Rav Chisda says this only applies to Kuta'im, and these Bnei Choza'ah, these are not Samaritans, this is a Jewish community. And therefore, Rav Yosef said, teach them the right way, that you don't have to take challah from rice. Okay, but Kuta'eh, my ta'ama, even though Rav Chisda says only Samaritans, maybe the reasoning still applies to these people. Mishum de mesarche milleta, hanach inashe name sarche milleta. The reason that that the Samaritans we don't tell them the true leniency of halacha is because they're going to stretch matters and they're going to say this is allowed, the next thing is allowed. These people b'nei chuza'eh, they're amei haaretz. They don't really know anything. And once we tell them that you don't have to take rice from challah from rice, they're not going to take challah from anything. They're just going to get it totally wrong. So therefore, let them stay in their way, what they were saying before. So that's what Abaye says. Okay, good. So for that reason, we should not tell them the truth, and we should let them continue taking challah from rice. Second, Ela Amarav Asher Chazenan Iruban Ores Achle La Nichla Zar Be'apayhu Dilma Mishtakecha Torat Chala Minayhu. So Rav Asher says, no, it depends. What's the story there? If most of them eat rice bread, that's what they eat most of the time, then do not let a non-Kohen eat the challah in front of them. In other words, in that case, if you tell them to stop taking challah, then they're going to not take challah at all, because most of what they eat is rice bread. So let them continue taking challah from rice, even though it's a stringency that's not necessary. However, iruban dagan achle nichla zar ba'apayhu dilma tel afrushe min hachiyuv ala petur. However, if most of the time they're eating grain bread and only sometimes they're eating rice, then it's you should teach them the right way. Let a non-Kohen go and eat the challah that they took from the rice, and to teach them that rice does not require challah. Now, why is that important to do? Because this chumrah can actually lead to a kula. And if you have two doughs, one made out of rice, one out of grain, halacha is actually you can take challah from one dough for the other. And so now in this case, if you take more from the rice dough and you say, I'm taking challah from the rice dough, and that will be considered the challah for the grain, then you're running into a big problem, because this is not actually challah, because rice doesn't require challah. And now no one ever actually took the challah from the grain. And the opposite could also be a problem. If I take from the grain challah for the rice, the thing is with challah, once I give it to the Kohen, so I don't usually take terumah maaser from challah. In this case, I'm taking challah for the rice dough, but the rice dough doesn't require challah. So now I'm giving the Kohen something that's tebel, and that is itself a problem, because it's not in the category of challah. So you see, this is a very important a source for the way you have to be careful. They took on a chumrah. If they're totally ignoramus, says, okay, let them keep the chumrah. At least they have something. But be careful, because it could lead to a kula. So it's good if they do eat grain. It's good for them to know the actual halacha. All right, so that's one story. And now we're going to analyze this general principle further. Gufa devarim mutarim. Something that is from the letter of the law is permitted, and there's some group that took on a stringency for whatever reason. You are not allowed to tell them that it is permitted. They should continue in their stringency, right? It's a bulwark against being more lenient. Okay, and that's the law. And Rav Chisda Bekuta Eskinan says that law only applies to Samaritans who are very lax in halacha. They barely know halacha at all. If they're doing some stringency, let them do it. Okay. Now, so that's the Rav Chisda statement. We're going to ask this. We're going to ask a question on Rav Chisda from three more cases. What about everybody else? That means if you're not a Samaritan, if you go and see to a community, they're not Samaritans. They're out somewhere in some small town, and they have some stringency. According to this, you should tell them this is an unnecessary chumrah. You don't need to do this. Is a false custom. Right? According to this, you should tell them. But the following three stories are all going to be about rabbis who go to some place and they don't tell them the correct law. They let the people, the locals, continue in the stringency. So let's see the three cases, and then we'll explain why. V'atanya rochasin shnei achim ke'achad, ve'en rochasin shnei achim beKabul. Is that two brothers are allowed to bathe together? I mean, they're bathing naked. I mean, in general, adult men are allowed to bathe together, like locker room today. It's fine. But and two brothers is also fine. It's it's not going to lead to any bad thoughts or anything. However, in the city of Kabul, they didn't. That was a stringency. They said two brothers will not. Okay. Now we'll explain this halacha more in a minute. Maaseh Bihuda v'Hillel banav shel Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel, right, the Nasi, he had two children, Yehuda and Hillel. And one time they were traveling and they went to the city, Kabul. They went to the bathhouse and they were bathing together. There was no problem with that. But since in that place they had a custom not to, so the whole city, they started raising their voices, say, how could they do this? In our entire lifetimes, we never saw this two brothers bathing together. So what did they do? One of the brothers went out to another room in the bathhouse, and they separated from each other, rather than tell the locals, your halacha is wrong. There's no halacha like this. Brothers are allowed to bathe together. So you see that they did not want to undo the stringency of this local place. The question is, why not? They weren't Samaritans, right? So Rav Chisda says it only applies to Samaritans. So that's question number one. Story number two, that will also question that Rav Chisda's rule. Yotzim bekur de kison b'Shabbat, ve'en yotzim bekur de sikon b'Shabbat bebireh. These are wide shoes that look like this. Maybe you can think of them like slippers. They're easy to put on, but easily fall off. And so you're allowed to wear these on Shabbat, but in this city of Kur de Kison, they had a stringency not to wear them on Shabbat because they might fall off and then you might carry them. Okay, good. It's not a halacha. It's just a stringent custom that they had. Maaseh Bihuda v'Hillel. Another story regarding these two brothers again. Banav shel Rabban Gamliel shiatzu bekur de Kison b'Shabbat bebireh. One time they were traveling and they went to the city of Bireh and they were wearing these wide shoes. And everybody was denouncing them. We never saw anybody wear these shoes on Shabbat. That's against the rule. And so they took them off and they gave them to the servants to carry. And they did not want to tell them that it's permitted. And so you see, once again here, even though Rav Chisda said that only Samaritans, you have to let them continue in their stringencies. Other people, you should tell them that this is a minhag ta'ut, unnecessary stringency. Yet here, the two brothers did not tell these locals that's permitted. They went along with it. Okay. And third story. V'yoshevin al safsele goyim b'Shabbat. Again, this Baraita continues that you're allowed to sit on stools of non-Jews on Shabbat. We're talking about stools that would be in the marketplace, and so you're sitting down there. If you're sitting down there, it might look like you're engaging in business. It's permitted to sit on the stools. You want to rest, it's fine, right? No one's going to think that. However, in Akko, in the city of Akko, that was their custom not to sit on those stools in order as a safeguard, so no one should think that they are doing business on Shabbat. Good. Now, Umaaseh Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel sheyashav al safsele goyim b'Shabbat be'Akko. Okay, so the sage he went to Akko. He was not from there. He went and sat on the chair. He thought it was allowed. It is allowed. But all the locals started yelling at him. We never did such a thing. So he went. He sat on the floor. He didn't want to start a fight. He didn't want to tell them that it's permitted. Okay, so these are all the three questions. How come all of these sages did not tell the locals that the halacha permits? Why did they keep quiet? The answer is, so it's true that Rav Chisda only said about Samaritans that you should let them continue in their stringencies so that they don't come to be even more lenient. If you tell them one leniency, they're going to go all the way. So too, the people in these various cities, these are small villages. they don't have they don't have rabbis that are living there that can teach them the subtleties of what's permitted and what's not permitted. So since there's no rabbis there, they have the same status as Samaritans. They are not learned, and therefore let them continue with these few stringencies that they have. Because if you tell them that you're allowed to sit there, then they're going to think that you're allowed to do business, and they don't know how to distinguish each case. Okay, good. So that's a good general rule. Even if you see a person, a community following a minhag ta'ut for stringency, there are some cases you should tell them because stringency might lead to leniency. But in these cases where they're not going to distinguish and they're going to then violate halacha, we should not tell them that it's an unnecessary stringency. Okay, good. Now analyzing these three cases, bishlama safsele goyim mishum demechazeh kemekach umemkar. The reason why they did not sit on the Gentile stools is because it looks like they're buying and selling on Shabbat. So it's it's not necessary, but it's an appropriate stringency. We understand it. Bekurde kison namen dilma mishtalefin v'atelet it to yenhu the arba'amot b'reshut harabim, and these wide shoes also, it's understandable they instituted that so that people will not start carrying if their shoes fell off. Ela rochasin my tamala. But why would they say that brothers may not bathe together? Well, it's based on this. Right? Men are allowed to bathe together. We don't suspect that that's going to lead to anything bad. Chutz me'aviv v'chamiv. However, not with one's father. It's not respectful to be naked with one's father or father-in-law. U'ba'al imo, also stepfather. U'ba'al achoto, and brother-in-law. And the reason for these last two is because you see, if you see these people naked, then one might start thinking about their intimate relations with a person's own mother or sister, and those are improper thoughts, and therefore one should not bathe together with those close relations. However, if someone's father is old or ill and needs help, then for the honor of someone's father, that is permitted to help the father out. And also stepfather. Stepfather might be someone who has brought up the child, so and acted like a father for the child's lifetime. Also, that person, if it's required for that person's honor to help them bathe, then also is permitted. So that's the official halacha. These people in Kabul, they said, let's add an extra gezerah. Technically, it's only a person's sister's husband which would be prohibited, but it's confusing. Sister's husband, brother-in-law, brother. Let's add an extra layer. So therefore, even brother, they said is not allowed. Okay. Anyway, that explains their extra stringencies that are not actually required lahalacha, but this is why they took them upon themselves. Okay. Last halacha regarding this: Tana tamid lo yirchatz im rabbo sarich lo mutar. Similarly, a student should not be bathed naked with his teacher. It's not respectful to see one's teacher in that state. However, again, if this teacher is elderly and requires assistance, then it's permitted because that's really for the honor of to help out the teacher. All right, good. So now a next story. Ki atada bar Hana achal dayitera. Okay, so now we have another difference between going back to our Mishnah, where there's a difference of minhag in one place or another. You have this section of the animal stomach. Part of the animal stomach that's more round is prohibited. And there's another part that's a straight part, but since it's near it, in some places they would not eat it, in some places they would eat it. So in Eretz Yisrael, they would eat this part of the stomach, but in Bavel, they were more stringent and they did not eat this part of the stomach. Okay, so the Bar Chana, he was from Eretz Yisrael and he came to Bavel. And so while he was in Bavel, ulegabe Rav Avira Saba veRabba bered Rav Huna. Kevan de Hazinhu kasyeh minayhu. So the Rabba Bar Chana is sitting there eating lunch, and he's eating this section of the stomach that they only are permitted to eat in Eretz Yisrael. But now he's in Bavel. These two rabbis all of a sudden come into his room and he covers his plate. He doesn't want them to see that he's eating something that is prohibited that in Bavel they don't eat. Okay, so that's the end of the story. But then those two rabbis go, Atuv Amru Lela Abaye. They went and report what happened to Abaye. They said, "Oh, we happened to barge in to the Baba Bara Chana eating lunch, and he covered his plate." Amar lehu shavinchu kikuta'eh. Oh, he treated you like Samaritans. In other words, technically, this part of the stomach is permitted, and he didn't want to tell you it's permitted, right? He wanted you to think that it's not permitted. Why? Well, this is the law that you don't tell Samaritans that they are following an unnecessary stringency because they're ignoramuses. They don't know anything. So he's saying, right, Rabba Bar Chana treated you like ignoramuses. Okay. ורבה בר חנה לית לה דתנה נותנין עליו חומרי מקום שיצא משם וחומרי מקום שהלך לשם. Right, okay, so we understand those two rabbis, but the question is now on Rabba Bar Chana himself. Doesn't he know the Mishnah? Right, that if you go from one place to another and one place has a stringency, the other place doesn't, you have to keep the stringencies of both places. So even though it's true in Eretz Yisrael where he was from, this was permitted, when he comes to Bavel, he should be stringent and not eat in that place. That's the question. He says that rule, the rule of the Mishnah is limited, or it only applies if you're going from one city to another city within Bavel, or from one city in Eretz Yisrael to another city in Eretz Yisrael, because those are the same level of authority. Or also, if you're going from Bavel and you have to Eretz Yisrael, you should respect the stringencies in Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael has a higher level. אבל מארץ ישראל לבבל לא, כיוון דאנן כיפינן להו, abdinan kevataihu. An amazing statement. They said if someone goes from Israel to Bavel, then that person does not have to keep the stringencies of Bavel. It says because we, meaning the Babylonians, are subordinate to those in Israel in halacha, we should act in accordance with their custom. This is quite an amazing statement that in Talmud Bavli, recognizing the authority, the higher authority of Eretz Yisrael. Maybe because Avirad Eretz Yisrael Machkim, right? Even the air in Eretz Yisrael makes people wise. Also in Eretz Yisrael, they actually had official semicha. That's why any sage that has Rabbi in their title, they're from Eretz Yisrael. In Bavel, they did not have that level of official semicha. So like Rav Asher, all the rabbis in Bavel are called Rav. So in any case, it's giving a limitation to the Mishnah that a person from Eretz Yisrael, he has higher authority and does not have to give in to the customs of the place that he goes to. Okay. Also, in this case, he's doing it privately, right? He was just in his own dining room. There's nobody else there, so he's eating on his own. It's not talking about when he was going and doing work outside. Okay. Rav Asher amar afilu tema me'eretz Yisrael leBavel. Rav Asher has a second answer. He says, no, you can even say that the Mishnah does apply when one travels from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. You always have to keep the custom, the stringent customs. However, hanemi lehechad en da'ato lachzor. But Abba Bar Chana da'ato lachzor hava. That's only if you're going to going there and moving for good. If he was moving to Bavel and was planning on staying there permanently, then he would have to take on the stringencies of Bavel and not be able to eat. But since he's going and he's going to go back, then that's it's okay. So see, if you take this and combine it with the things that you're doing, because this was done in private, then you understand why people the Israelis nowadays, if they go outside of Israel for Yom Tov, they can do melacha and Yom Tov Sheni in private, right? So it does, right? So it still does apply since they're going to go back, but not if they're moving permanently. Okay. Amar le Rabba Bar Chana libneh beni lo tocha lo befanai velo shelo befanai ani. So this is Rabba Bar Chana. He's the one who ate the stomach the straight part of the stomach. However, even though he ate it, he told his son not to. Right? He said, "Do not eat the stomach, not when you're with me, and not even when, and also, of course, not when you're not with me." Why? Why? If he did it, why can't his son do it? אני שראיתי את רבי יוחנן שאכל, כדאי הוא רבי יוחנן לסמוך עליו בפניו ושלא בפניו. My teacher was Rabbi Yochanan, and he used to eat it. Rabbi Yochanan is such a great sage that not only he can do it for himself, but since I was with him, I can rely on his heter, whether when I was eating with him and also not with him. But you, אתה לא ראית אותו, לא תאכל בין בפניי, בין שלא בפניי. Since you were not there with Rabbi Yochanan, you're only a second generation student, and therefore you may not continue to eat it. Right? So this is quite an amazing thing, that a precedent of a sage who goes against the majority opinion can be relied upon. Look, the sage himself, he has his understanding, and so the Rabbi Yochanan, of course, can do it. Even the one generation students can continue. It says, I was with him, I did it, so they can do that as well, but it doesn't last two steps removed. Okay, very interesting. Now the problem is that what this statement that Rabbi Bar Chana just said is contradicts something else that he also said. We're not going to even answer this question. We're just going to note the contradiction. Damar Rabbi Bar Chana, Sachli Rabbi Yochanan ben Elazar, פעם אחת נכנסתי אחר רבי שמעון ben רבי יוסי ben לקוניה לגינה, ונטל ספיחה קירוב, ואכל ונתן לי. So Rabbi Bar Chana reports that one time Rabbi Yochanan said that he went to a garden with Rabbi Shimon ben Yosef ben Lukina, right? And this was during Shvi'it year. During a Shvi'it year, generally you can't grow anything. You're not allowed to plant and grow anything. But what about things that grow on their own? Those generally are a problem. They're not allowed. And he took the cabbage and ate it and gave it to me. So v'amar li beni befanai echol shelo befanai lo tochal. He says, listen, here's a cabbage, and he said, befanai, when you're with me, you can eat it, but you cannot rely on this leniency to eat cabbage during Shvi'it year that grows on its own when you are not with me. Why? אני שראיתי את רבי שמעון בן יוחאי שאכל, כדאי הוא רבי שמעון בן יוחאי לסמוך עליו בפניו ושלא בפניו. I was with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. He permitted eating aftergrowth of cabbage. And so therefore, since I was with him and he's a great sage, so his leniency can rub off on me, and therefore I'm allowed to eat it whether I'm with him or not with him. But you, אתה, בפניי אכול, שלא בפניי לא תאכל. You can eat it while you're with me, but not when you are not with me. Okay, so you see that in this case, Rabbi Bar Chana did rely on the second step, that someone who was with Rabbi Shimon is allowed to eat the cabbage and rely on the leniency of the teacher's teacher. Whereas in the first case, he was more stringent and said you can't even eat it when you're with me. Okay, that's the story. Just trying to figure out the halacha behind it. My Rabbi Shimon, what is this? Anytime we see Rabbi Shimon stam, that's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, right? What was his opinion? And it's based on this. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon omer kol asefechin asurim chutz mesifiche kerub she'en kayose bahen beyerek hasedeh. Aftergrowths, things that grow on their own, vegetables that grow on their own during Shvi'it are prohibited. The reason is because even though you didn't work on it, if we allow it, then farmers are going to they're going to plant few seeds, they're going to say it was an aftergrowth, but it could lead to people planting things. But kerubim, cabbages are different than other vegetables in the garden. It seems because cabbages do have roots under the ground that continue from season to season. So they're more like fruits in that sense, and therefore, there's no need to replant them every year. So he says we can be lenient and assume that they were in fact aftergrowths from a previous year. Chachamim do make no distinction, and they say cabbages and all other vegetables, none of them can be eaten during the Shvi'it year. Okay. By the way, this halacha makes it extremely difficult to live during the Shivit year because, the things that just grow on their own, that's the only thing that they'll be able to have if they, from whatever they weren't able to store from before. So the commentaries debate whether this is talking about after the time of Bi'ur. In other words, when there's still lots of them around, then according to many, it is permitted. And this is only talking about when after there's no hefker anymore and you have to get rid of everything, like we said yesterday. And both of these opinions, right? Why do they say aftergrowths are prohibited in general? They're both following Rabbi Akiva, who quoted the pasuk, during this Shavuot year, right? The people are going to say, "Wait, we can't plant anything or gather our crops." And Torah says, "Don't worry, right? You'll be taken care of." Why does the pasuk have to say we can't plant and we can't gather? If they didn't plant anything, then how are they going to gather anything? So we learn from this pasuk that even things that you didn't plant but they grew on their own, the aftergrowth, are also prohibited. במאי קמי פלגה, רבנן סברי גזרינן ספיחי קירו בטו שער ספיחי דעלמא, ורבן שמעון סבר לגזרינן ספיחי קירו בטו ספיחי דעלמא. So why do they disagree then? They both agree that cabbages are in fact different from other vegetables, that they can regrow from year to year, even without replanting. But the rabbis say we should make a gezerah, that from cabbages, that we should treat them like all other vegetables, because people make a mistake and they look like regular vegetables. So therefore, make a blanket prohibition. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, we don't have to make a gezerah. People will know cabbages are different from other vegetables, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, good. And now we get back to the next section of the Mishnah. It says haolech mimakom, right? Someone who goes from a place where they do work on Pesach to a place where they don't do work on Pesach, right? And the opposite, you have to take on both stringencies. Bishlam haolech mimakom sheosin makom she'enosin notnin alav chorei makom shehalach lesham va'al yeshenei adam mipnei machloket. So the second clause in the Mishnah said one should not deviate because of a dispute, right? So that when the Mishnah says that, what case would that apply to? Well, it makes sense for the first case. If someone goes from a place where they don't do work, where they do work, to a place where they don't do work, and then he's going to go be the only one performing work in that place. He's going to stand out. He's going to look different. It's going to cause dispute. So for that first case, we understand why the Mishnah would make that rule. Ela mimakom she'en osin makom she'osin. If you come from a place where people do not do work, and you go to a place where they do work, al yeshaneh adam mipnei machloket. Then what does that mean? You should not deviate from the local custom. So that means you should do work. I came from a place where they didn't do work. I go to a place where they do work. And it says, do the same as what everybody else is doing there. So that means I should go and do work like the locals. But that contradicts the first part of the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah first says, do the stringencies of both places. And then it says, don't do anything different from the local custom. That's contradictory, right? If I should take on the stringency of the place I came from is not to do work. And then you say, do what everybody else is doing. That means I should do work. So which one is it? So we have two answers. The Rabbi says the statement that you should not be different from the locals is only talking about the first case where you're going to a place where they don't do work. So then take on the stringency of that place and don't do work. But it's not referring to the second clause. Second clause, in fact, you should be different from the locals, even though they're all working. You don't work. But Rava says we can actually apply that rule to both clauses, that you should never do something that will stand out as being different from the locals. However, it's not a problem in the second case. What are you worried about? Are you worried that someone is going to say melacha is not allowed, and someone's going to look at him not working and says, "Oh, what are you doing? How come you're not working?" No one will say that. There's a lot of people that are idle in the marketplace. Not everybody's working. You don't like you have to work. So if this person comes from a place where they don't work and he goes to this place and he's sitting around on the morning of the 14th not doing work, it's not going to arouse any dispute that people will say, "Oh, look, he's not following the local custom." If he's just not doing work, that's just passive, and so there's no problem in doing that. And that ends the daf today. And so we see a lot of different variations of these local customs, and when the locals are being stringent for no good reason, do you tell them that or do you not tell them that? When you're there yourself, you have to practice. You can't go against the local custom yourself, but it makes a difference if it's in public and in private. And very interestingly, it depends on going from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel or the other way around. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.